Hi, YouTube listeners. It's future Blevins. You'll actually be hearing from me later in the episode as well. But you're going to notice that the sound and video is not synced here. It's off by just a little bit, which I know is super, super annoying. I realized this like right after we recorded the episode. Obviously, not going to go back and record again. So I'm just going to apologize in advance. We're just going to have to deal with it on the YouTube. The sound and audio quality should actually be a little bit better than it normally is. The long story short is I got a new piece of audio equipment and it messed with the video syncing for some reason. But the audio should sound crystal clear. And the content is obviously still there, and it's going to be a great episode with Mort. So excuse the desync, but the audio should be fine. So maybe not going to be staring at our beautiful, beautiful mugs as much. But if you do actually, for whatever reason, really want to see the audio, the video cropper, you can go over to twitch.tv/the Blevins and check the recording from last night. And there's actually a little bit of extra, a little bit of bonus content in there that we didn't make it to the live show, or to the final episode. So check that out. And again, sorry for the difficulties on the video side. Hey guys, and welcome back to Little Legends Podcast, episode 21, the last one of, or I guess the first one of the decade if you're listening in podcast land, but the last live one of the decade. I am your host, the Blevins. Joining me as always is Boop. What's up, buddy?
Giving you the double hand salute.
And joining us today, our illustrious guest, none other than Mortdog. Thank you for coming on the show today, bud.
Praise him.
Hey, no problem. Glad to be here.
Oh, man. Yeah, this is definitely, we're both very excited to have you on. I have consumed a lot of your content from streams to tweets to everything. And obviously, we've played a lot of TFT, so very, very happy to have you on.
Yeah, like I said, glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we are going to be talking to Mort extensively today, so if you are listening live, get some questions in chat. Can't promise we'll get to everything because we are on a little bit of a time schedule here, but and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, but we are going to get to what we can. Before we jump in, and really, I mean, we're just, Mort, I'm sorry, we're going to grill you today.
Oh, no problem.
We've got a
I was
laundry
expecting
list.
it.
We've got a laundry list of questions here, but we do have a little bit of housekeeping to do before that. Of course, guys, we are a prediction esports podcast, PRWDITCION. You guys know how to spell it at this point, even though I'm looking at it and still can't spell it. Make sure to follow us on there as well as on this feed as well. And, of course, you can support us over at patreon.com/Little Legends Podcast as well. No new patrons this week, but we have had a lot of support in the past few weeks, so thank you guys. Hey guys, this is Future Blevins here. I'm jumping in because we didn't quite get to all of the news and housekeeping on the show. Obviously wanted to take as much time and get as many questions in with Mort, so I'm just going to jump in here and talk about some of the things that we didn't get to do on the live show. One thing I wanted to announce here is that this Friday, we are doing the first game night collaboration with Giant Slayer. So around 8:30 Eastern time on Friday, we're going to be at twitch.tv/Giant Slayer for game night. If you want to play, go over to discord.me/Little Legends Podcast. It's still going to be in the same Discord. We're going to be on a different Twitch channel. It's going to be nice and fancy. We're going to have all sorts of cool stuff there. So make sure you're checking out that. We're also, Giant Slayer is also doing their fight nights, which used to be the Heroes Hearth fight nights. Everything for Heroes Hearth that is TFT related is now Giant Slayer. So if you're wondering where that's from, 9 Eastern, twitch.tv/Heroes Hearth. this is going to be the last one on the Heroes Hearth channel. But it's the same Fight Night series that we've been talking about and that you guys have seen. So make sure you check that out. It's going to be on Heroes Hearth now. It will be on Giant Slayer TV moving forward. The other piece of news here is the Fandom Legends tournament has concluded. We saw the end there. Grand Vice actually ended up taking that one down, and I got to watch a little bit of that over the holiday. He dominated that the last few rounds there. I think he won. He got first in 2 or maybe 3 of 5 matches. I think in 3 of 5 matches he got first place in that lobby, and that was a stack lobby. But down the line we had Grand Vice in first, Dark Hydra in second, Liquid Hyped in third, Alan ZQ in fourth, Bersalis in fifth, Salvi in sixth, Crowan, friend of the show, in seventh, and Tabs in eighth. So just an absolutely stacked lobby, and Grand Vice just dominated. He ended up with 46 points. Second place had 34. So just like a lap ahead in a lot of ways. So it was definitely a great event to watch. Hoping to see more of this type of event in the future with this competitive tournament. And was a really great one to watch. And huge shout outs to Fandom Legends and State Farm for sponsoring them. Was just a cool event. All right, guys, we're gonna get back to the live show. I guess what was live then, but anyway, I'll send you guys back over. Enjoy the rest of the show and enjoy the interview with Mortdog. Okay. Now we'll start the show off like we always do, and we'll start with our guest Mort, and just talk a little bit about how was your week in TFT. I know we saw Santa Mort play some games last week, but any notable games for you? Anything stand out to you?
Nothing too crazy. I've actually been trying to not play TFT for a week because I've been so 100% TFT for about 6 months straight. That being said, I did jump on PBE yesterday or today actually, and played a few games. A lot of second places is what I kept running into. Could never quite finish and seal the deal. So, but trying out all the new items.
I've had the same thing actually the last 3 or 4 games. I mean, there's been some 6th and 8th places intermingled in there, but I've been like, oh man, I'm super far ahead. I got top 4, and then I just get to I'm either playing against Blender or a really strong Warden's comp, and I'm like, my poor Olaf, he can't seal the deal. He's got second place written all over him. Always the bridesmaid, but never the bride.
Yeah.
Boop, what about you? Any crazy games for you this week?
Yeah, so it's actually really funny. So my husband got some sinus surgery. I'm sure the second anyone sees him, it's like how someone goes to Harvard is the first thing you mention when you meet them. And so I've been kind of stressed out about that because I see one. Self-admitted he's a drama queen, and so when I play TFT, that's always in the back of my mind, right? What is he gonna ask for next? And so I haven't gotten to actually dive in until the other day, where I was finally I was I need some space. All right, I've been helping you too much. And I'm gonna go play some games. And so I got into some TFT, and I got whipped hard, man. Super hardcore. I am out of practice. This is not something that I felt was riding a bike. Before I've taken some breaks and came back, I was like, all right, these are the things that are good and blah blah blah. But this time around, man, all my games have been awful. And it's all on me. It has nothing to do with Mort. I wish I could say it was his fault, but it's my fault, and that's unfortunate. But really, at the end, it's really my husband's fault for getting surgery. And so that's my that's my week in TFT. Cheers.
Yeah, I like I was saying, I've had a lot of second places, but I've been actually steadily climbing. I'm making my way back through Plat, almost back in Plat 2, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, I wanna get back to Diamond like I was in season 1, but I don't know. It's feeling like it might be a little tough, but we'll see. Each pat. I mean, this actually 9.24B has actually been very, very nice to me, but there's been some where I've just been it just didn't click for me. Took a little bit, but watching hours and hours of challenger players on
Yeah.
stream is very
Diamond
helpful.
2 is where I've peaked so far this season, which is
Nice.
higher than I was set 1. This shouldn't surprise anyone, but I usually play best right when a new patch hits. It's almost like I know a little bit more. Weird.
That's so funny. So, quick question before we get on, because this kind of like reminds me of something. And so you work so closely with the game. Like when you play, do you ever like see something and just like one, you're like, I'm proud of that one, or two, it's like, ugh, got to change that, right? Because
Oh yeah.
I think you would assume that since you work so closely with the game, that it'd be very easy for you to like notice those things. But on the other side, like when you're playing, do you go through all like the different kinds of strategies? Because Diamond 2 is pretty high, but since you make the game, maybe some people might expect that to be higher.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the reasons why I struggle to climb pretty heavily. Is I'm always trying all the different strategies to see like what's working, what's not.
Mhm.
I think you see this sometimes when I play on stream. It's like, I don't know, let's try four desert, 6 berserker this time. See how that goes. Why isn't it that working? What's wrong with it? And so oftentimes, like if I wanted to climb, it's like sure I could run blender and berserkers every game. Great, no problem. But that's not going to help me be better at developing the game and understanding why light doesn't work, for example. In fact, right before this, I played a live game, just a normal, real quick, tried to force light, and it's like, why isn't light working? What's its weakness? Where is it struggling? Like, what would we have to change to make this comp work in a current meta? And so like that's part of the process that you have to do when you're playing the games.
That seems like a double-sided sword, man. Or it's one of those things where you want to try to enjoy yourself and appreciate the game that you developed, but at the same time, it's like seeing a piece of art that all the mistakes on, right? It's like when an artist shows you their work, the first thing they'll do is point out what's wrong with it, right? So I'm sure you're doing a lot of that on your own. That's got to be tough to balance.
It's definitely tough at times. It's interesting because like we have our perception of what the game is and what the game should be, and then you see how players end up playing the game and how it ends up. So, for example, we've been wanting Six Inferno to be a pretty playable comp for a while, and we know that like it's definitely something that can succeed, but players were struggling to find out how to build into it. Like you can't just buy all the Inferno and make it work. You have to plan around wardens and things like that. And so then when it finally comes together, there's a bit of like, ha, I told you so. I knew it. I knew what was going on here. But at the same time, when like that doesn't play out and you're like, well, wait, why aren't Rangers working? No one's building them. What's going on? Are we wrong? Are they wrong? What's going on? Because sometimes like we talk about balance on both League and TFT, and it's like perception is sometimes more powerful than actual numbers. So
Perception is reality is something a wise man once said to me once.
Yeah, I mean, berserkers were on and were relatively close to as powerful as they are now for a long time. And just, I remember when they first came out, some people in our community were playing and it was like, yeah, these just aren't good. But then it was like, oh, the unlock is you need to have a Hush on Olaf, or you need to have RFC on Olaf, or both.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, all of a sudden they went from like, this isn't worth it at all to this is a very legitimate strategy, and nothing changed except for, oh, people realize that that's good.
Yeah. Or even something as simple as like some bold statements like you could never have a melee carry. And it's like, well, turns out if you give that melee carry a ton of lifesteal and attack speed and survivability, it can work. Or you can never have a comp with 6 melee units. It's just impossible the way they group up. And it's like, well, if they all cleave, sure enough, like that can actually work. So
the other assumption was that a household appliance could never be at the top of the meta, but here we are.
Yeah.
The blender.
Frickin' blender.
The blender.
See, and blender is one of those things like you didn't want it to be good. Like we never wanted blender to be this amazing comp. It was cool that it was discovered, this interesting interaction. But when you know why it's good behind the scenes, you're like, ugh, that shouldn't work that way. God dang it.
Yeah. Well, the good news is obviously you have the ability to patch these things. That's the beauty of an online game. And even though TFT's not technically a card game, I guess. I don't it feels very much like a card game, at least to me, someone who's come from Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone and all those other, traditional card games. And I don't know how much you still pay attention to MTG Mort, but Oko, was a big thing that a planeswalker from the newest set, and boy oh boy was he a bad thing for the meta. you think Blender, you think Blender's bad. Imagine if people are paying $50 for Nocturnes, and then you have to change it or ban it. That's what, and that's part of the reason why I don't play Paper Magic anymore. But that's a whole other.
I remember all those cycles. Like the time when I was deepest in Magic was the Urza's Saga way back in the day.
Oh, okay.
When
So
they had the like broken lands, like Gaia's Cradle, and oh god,
Tolarian Academy. Yep. Boop's just silently nodding.
yeah, Magic the Gathering. Yeah. Well, I think that actually transitions into kind of our first like official question, because you talked about your past. So, what is kind of your gaming origin? You posted something on Twitter recently about some of the landmarks of your gaming life. I'd love to hear it from the Mort God himself. What kind of got you to this point?
Yeah. So. It all started. I'm gonna try to go quick here, but biggest start was I was like 5 years old, and my mother and grandmother bought me a small like 13-inch TV, which it's 1988, so that's a big deal, and an NES, and it was like holy crap. And I was just from there, I was just playing games all the time. You kind of know how it is.
Sure do.
Yep. So it's like any chance I could get, play games. So just imagine that all the way through high school, playing games. Always wanted to be a game designer. So graduate high school, went to University of Washington for a semester.
Oh, my sister works there. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, continue. Sorry.
I was there for one semester, and I was like, this isn't going to help me be a game designer. I'm out. Dropped out. Went back to working at McDonald's for a bit, because I'd done that in high school. Then found DigiPen, which is a gaming school up in Seattle. And it was like they had programming and art degrees at the time. They didn't have a game design degree. And I was like, okay, at least it would get me in the industry. It's better than nothing. I'm applying. I'm going in. Got there, did their programming degree. Now, what's crazy, though, is like my sophomore year, Nintendo Software Technology, which was right next door at the time, they opened up a game design internship. And this is like unprecedented. They'd never done it before, and they did it once after. So pretty crazy. And it was only open for juniors and seniors. Oh. I was a sophomore. And I was like, no, like you have to let me try, because I'd grown up playing a ton of console games. I was basically NES, SNES, 64 kind of gamer. Didn't have PC till like 17.
Yeah.
So applied, beat out everyone else, did their level design test, beat out everyone else, got the internship, which was like, hallelujah. So then my last 2 years, I was going to school and working at Nintendo as a level design intern. And then just stuck with it. Then from there, just years and years of, working at Nintendo, shipping games, worked my way up to director, came to Riot. Rest is history. But yeah, like I said, as far as games go, a lot of console games. PC, right around 17 with StarCraft. World of Warcraft was big from like 18 to 24. I have a couple Realm First 70, I think it is.
Nice.
So that was kind of fun.
Nice. Man, this is some this is some boomer stuff, man.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
This is the boomer show.
Well, I think it's crazy how the gaming industry is all about just like putting your knuckles to the ground and just kind of like walking uphill both ways to school in 2 feet of snow, right? It kind of is like the epitome of that. So what kind of at Nintendo got you most prepared for what you're doing now? Because that's obviously like the basis of a lot of your experience. How has that helped you at Riot? What are some skills that you learned there as a young developer that you're still using now as someone who is a little bit more experienced?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think every game designer falls into a trap, especially when they're young, is like they go in there and they're like, all right, I get to make games. Time to make a game I would love. I would love to make this kind of game with deep, complex systems, and it'll be great. And I remember my boss at the time, it was like maybe my like third day at work, and she's like, oh, Mort, you have to learn. We don't make games for you. We make games for everybody.
That's true,
and it was like very blunt, but it was very real, because the biggest thing you learn is like as someone who's like deeply engaged in the gaming ecosystem, you're probably in the 95th percentile at least. And then someone who's a game designer, you're probably in the 99th percentile. And then someone who's, platinum or whatever, like you're in the 99.9th percentile. And so your perspective is very different than everyone else's perspective. And so at Nintendo, we had this thing, we called it the 35-year-old mom test, which, by the way, made me feel old now that I'm older than that. But we would bring in like 35-year-old moms who like barely played games and have them play the game. And it was like eye-opening where it's like, oh, that's what they struggle with. They don't even know, oh, God. And we actually did something similar when we redid League's tutorial. And it was the same thing where we had a couple designers who were younger on the team be like, oh, I didn't even... Wait, they don't know how to right-click? Oh, God.
Oh, no.
Yep.
Excuse me, grandson.
95% of the people we had test the new tutorial, first thing they did, they burned heal. Because it's on
crazy.
D. WASD.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
First thing, every time.
That's like those. That's like some eye-opening stuff, right? Like, and why UI is so interesting. It's just like you don't know how me as a the 30-year-old guy is going to interact with this particular piece of UI versus my mom who I don't even know if she knows where to put her hands on a keyboard, right?
Yep.
Crazy.
And so one of the biggest skills as a game designer we can have is like empathy for a bunch of different people and different perspectives and how they'll perceive things. And so it's like, knowing how a challenger player will interact with TFT is one thing, but what about your silver player? How do they interact with it? How do they see? And in TFT terms, the example I always bring up recently is Olaf, where it's like Olaf is really frustrating if you don't know how to counter him and seems overpowered and broken. But actually, at like challenger level, he's like kind of okay. So it's like, how do you make sure that the lower skilled player can understand that and feels fair and figure out the counter versus the higher skilled player?
Yeah. Also, never tell people how to beat Olaf because I need to get higher in rank before I need to grind up a little bit higher before people start countering my Olafs. Okay.
Good thing that's not what this podcast is about today.
Yeah.
I will have to. I will be about the whole show if we start giving away how to beat Olaf. He's unbeatable, guys. Don't let Mort doesn't know. Olaf's actually unbeatable. When you see me playing Olaf, just sell all your units.
Accept your fate.
Yeah, just accept the fate of the bearded Viking. So you started at Nintendo, and obviously I know just from listening to your streams that you worked on puzzle games at least at some point. What kind of got you into like strategy games versus obviously you could have been in platformers? I mean, Nintendo does the full variety. What kind of led you towards strategy games and eventually into the TFT?
Yeah, so this is something interesting I think a lot of people don't realize about the gaming industry is like the best designers don't actually get to necessarily work on what they want. And so it's like I actually don't really like puzzle games that much. They're just not really my cup of tea. But it was what NST was making when they hired me and what we were told to make for a long time. And so if you can be a good designer at something that you're not super passionate about and find a way to be passionate about it, that'll prove that like when you finally get to work on something you do want, just how much better you'll even be. One of the games I had to work on at Nintendo was called Crosswords Plus. I learned more about crossword puzzles than I would ever want to know. I don't enjoy crossword puzzles, but like you learn it and you understand it because it's the job, and you go real deep because that's what you need to do. Strategy games is kind of similar. Like I played StarCraft, Fire Emblem, Disgaea were kind of big ones, but like strategy is not really like my main genre that I'm like super passionate about. But when Dota Auto Chess came out, it was like, okay, this is getting big, and okay, we're starting to invest in it. I should really go deep and understand this. So I put like 150 hours into Dota Auto Chess, was researching TFT, and it's like that's part of the job is just understanding things that aren't necessarily your favorite.
So what are your favorites then? Like on a more positive, like so, like what kind of gets those gears going?
I mean, so I would
before
love
that question,
to make. Oh yeah.
Before that one, sorry, I have a follow up. Are we going to see a TFT crossword puzzle?
Oh God, no!
Oh,
Don't let me
man.
ever.
You used one of your
No.
interruptions for that question, Blevins.
I had to.
All right. I'm glad. It's valuable. The stock market, it's a bull market. I completely understand.
No, favorite genres though. Metroidvanias have been sort of my like. If I could work on anything, it would be a Metroidvania. I've been begging Riot to let me do that. It'll never happen, but someday.
That sounds nuts to me to try to like develop. Oh man,
Well-
because they're because Castlevania and stuff, right? That stuff seems
Yep.
so hard. There's so much there, and it's like, how do you balance difficulty and stuff? Is that kind of what like speaks to you about it? And like, why
Yeah,
you
and so actually, our sophomore project at Digipen was a co-op Metroidvania.
That's sick.
But it's a combination of like the level design as well as the RPG systems that like Castlevania brought to it. I found over my career I'm really passionate about the systems, which is one of the things I love about working on TFT. Is TFT is actually just a domino of systems applying to each other, right? Like how do the items affect the moves, affect the characters, and so like that mathematical part of it has been something that's fascinated me for a long time. Metroidvanias have that to a degree, as well as like the pathfinding of like what's the optimal route and all that stuff. Other things like I don't know if I'd ever want to work on one, but I like playing platformers. Those are fun. And then the other big one is like loot grinders, like Diablo 3. I'd love to work on something like that.
Oh man, I love platformers. Do you remember the Lion King platformer on
I
the Sega
do.
Genesis? That was like
do.
the hardest game I've ever played.
I liked
That was
the
a good one.
Aladdin platformer for Super
That
Nintendo.
was good too. Disney actually made some good games back in the day.
There's a like bundle now that has both those games on it for like Switch.
What?
It's like $30.
What?
And it's got this whole like rewind feature. Yep.
Yeah, my wallet is literally levitating in front of me.
Wait,
it's just
it has
like, please take me.
Wait. It has a rewind function and not the ability to put in the old passwords with like the genie face. Man, I bet
I think you can do that too.
Oh, okay. Because I actually had like the old manual when I was like a kid, and me and my parents and my brother like wrote down like drew a like genie face, Aladdin, Abu, and that like gets to like the
nice.
the like the genie dream level, which is I didn't even care about beating the game. I just kept playing that level over and over again when I was a little kid.
Yeah. Well, back then they made games hard because you couldn't make games long, right? So in order to like keep playing and get a lot of play time out of it, they had to make them extremely difficult.
Well,
and it's funny. Yeah, go ahead.
There's that aspect, but there's also like it goes back to what I was just saying about how we don't make games for ourselves. You see this a lot with indie developers, right? Like they make a game and they're all really hard. And they end up that way because oftentimes those indie developers are frankly a combination of inexperienced and not necessarily looking at like a broader target. And so they make it for themselves, and it's like they play it every day and it ends up hard and they're like, that's not that hard. I notoriously I look at things like Super Meat Boy's like last few levels and you're like, what?
What about the first few levels? Because that's where I got caught up on Super Meat Boy.
Like I beat Super Meat Boy and then you get to the Dark World and you're just like, dude, come on. Come on now.
Is this even fun anymore?
Yeah, and clearly there are a small subset of people who do find it fun. But I think that's sort of what we were going through in the early phases of the industry as well, is it's like, this is what's fun, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that small subset of people are playing in games done quick right now, which Boop has on his second monitor while this podcast is going on. So
that's not true, but is a good idea. No, I gotta put all of my focus on the Mortgod here. So you talked about what your favorites are and how you like the different trees in the auto battler, how everything is kind of like dominoes related. So you liked it. You mentioned that Riot was exploring it. When did Riot start thinking about this, right? What was the moment that they're like, all right, we're going to make this game? Was it influenced by the popularity of Dota Auto Chess, or was it something that you always had in mind?
Yeah, so League of Legends was basically, historically was formed from the original Dota, and like the popularity and Riot's success is sort of attributed to, we took a game that was sort of like blooming a new genre and we were like, hey, that's cool, and we made our spin on it and we made it better, and the rest is history. And so oftentimes I think Riot is looking for things like that. So fast forward to Auto Chess, where Medler and a couple other people around the office had sort of discovered it and were like, this is really fun, this is pretty cool, and it was taking off really well in China at first, and then started to spread as well amongst the Dota community. And so it was another opportunity where it was like, this seems really cool. There's a bunch of stuff that we hate about this. There's a bunch of stuff we love about this. What if we did our spin on it? And so Medler worked with a bunch of the other leadership team and sort of was like, okay, let's do our take on this. Can we make that happen? The team started prototyping, figured out that was possible, and then pushed from there. But there was even debate of like, should this be its own game and its own engine? Should it be inside of League? You know, lots of conversations in that regard. And so we've been pretty open that like the fact that Dota Auto Chess was so much fun, we're like, this is really cool, new genre, let's do it ourselves. And so now what we've got is like, we've got TFT in our hands, which, as I keep mentioning, is like a new genre. And we're still learning like what this genre looks like 6 months later, a year later, because there's no blueprint for that, you know?
That's definitely true. I mean, the one thing I miss about playing original Dota Auto Chess, the mod, is just the fact that I have to like press Z on my horse to sell unit. I mean, is there any thought of putting that back? God, it was so bad.
The controls were definitely challenging, and I'm sure the developers were dealing with like the limitations of the engine or whatever, but they were rough. And that was, I mean, that was like the easiest thing. It was like, you'd look at this and go, okay, the UI needs to be better. Sure, great. But what about the gameplay? How do we make this our own? And that's where like Volti and the team, because Volti was the lead designer before I joined, they did a lot of cool stuff like the hexes. They got rid of spell cooldowns, things like that. There were some pretty good innovations that I think have helped us.
Yeah, I mean, going into obviously, designing a similar game or a game in the same genre, how much were you actually looking to change from a game like Auto Chess? Like how, was there a metric or a point in time where you're like, okay, this feels different. This is TFT. This isn't just the Riot skin on Auto Chess.
I don't think there was a particular metric of like, we need to hit this bar and be this different. Because even something as simple as like the hexes versus the squares was something that was debated for a long time. But it was really more just about like, okay, we're trying to make our take on this genre. What does the best version of that look like? Knowing our understanding of game design and the industry and what players want. And so how do we do what's the best for that? And if that ended up being super similar to Dota Auto Chess, I think we would have been okay with that. It just so happened that there were certain calls and certain changes that wasn't the case. So
yeah.
Interesting. So you've mentioned your team a lot, right? So what is the structure of that team? How many people are on it? Because I think a lot of people are very curious as to like what the inner workings of Riot and how they give all the resources. Because after the 10-year anniversary, you guys look like a company of like 8 million people, right?
I mean, it's definitely a big company. It's definitely a big company. I always avoid answering this question explicitly though, because like when you say how big is the team, right? I could talk about like the core team. But what that would do is that would sort of not give credit to a lot of the support people that don't necessarily get to be part of the core team, but are doing a lot of really valuable work. So, for example, like approximate number, I think we have like 7 designers right now. It's like 7 or 8. A couple engineers, couple artists, things like that. That might be the core team. Product managers like Maple, dev managers. But then again, we also have people like our insights people who are helping us. We've got marketing, publishing people. And again, like when I start naming these people, it's not like this is their only job, but they're helping on the team a lot. We've got, the esports side that are working on the competitive coming up. And there's like a bunch to name. Even someone like Medler, who is technically the head designer of League of Legends. Well, TFT is part of League of Legends, so he has to come by and make sure we're doing things, so... And that's where, like, if you add it all up, it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of 200. But at the same time, probably 100 of those are maybe giving it, 5 to 10 hours of their time a week. And a bunch more are giving it 40, and a bunch more are giving it, more. And it's just, it takes a lot of people to run such a big game that is played by millions of people across the world. Even something as simple as, like, the servers running, right? And, like, there were a couple bugs over the holiday. There were a couple bugs over the holiday, and it's like, I don't know who's fixing those. It's somebody, and they deserve credit. So,
Yeah, those QA guys, man, they deserve that credit, and I'm not saying that facetiously. QA, it's a tough job, man, and
Yeah.
they're super valued because we wouldn't know what some of those problems were if it wasn't for those girls and guys doing it for us.
Oh, we would
Yeah,
know.
and so that's why I don't like to answer the how big is the team, because 200 sounds like a lot, but for a normal game development team, it's actually like I think we're pretty small, and it's coming from NST, where we were a core team of 45.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you guys are like your own little indie studio within Riot. It's kind of like when I hear like 7 developers and we get help otherwise, it's kind of what it reminds me of. But I
Kind
could be
of.
totally off. Yeah.
Kind of, and especially like the core team that started building TFT, like from the ground up, they were like a real guerrilla small team of like 15 people. Actually, that might even be too many, but early on, it was just like them. We hid them in a corner, and they worked their butts off to get that game going.
Yeah, and we thank them for that work because, of course,
Absolutely,
we wouldn't be here if they weren't.
absolutely.
I gotta say, just personally, because I came in and I had played I'd played Dota Auto Chess. Just I thought it was fun, but it didn't really captivate me. And like when Underlords came out and TFT came out, kind of in the same general, and then the continuation of Auto Chess, but in its own client, like. I liked them enough. I liked all of them enough, but I didn't have any particular. I hadn't played League of Legends in close to 10 years. Like I think I looked back and I stopped playing League of Legends in like 2010. So like I had no bias towards TFT other than the fact that like the game itself brought me in. Like a lot of the like even like you mentioned the spell cooldowns not being there, like that type of like almost like we open the floodgates of like you can kind of do anything and it might not be good. But you can kind of break the rules, so to speak, and that really kind of spoke to me. And is that kind of like a core philosophy for you and the design team, like having that sort of like unlimited potential in a way? Like you can have 58 Zeds. Now, there's been times when that maybe was a problem, but maybe it's not always good.
So this is an interesting thing because, while I am the design lead, there are a bunch of designers on the team, each with their own opinions and insight. And realistically, like we don't always see eye to eye. And the reason I'm bringing this up is like you mentioned the Zed example. Zed's an example where if I had got my way, actually, we probably wouldn't have shipped Zed. He would have been a much more boring champion. Because I'm more hyper focused on like the balance, whereas Riot Whitrock in this case is much more like, this would be awesome. And it's valuable to have both. It really is. Because like sometimes you need to push the boundaries to come up with something really exciting and cool. And I look back at that All-Stars moment where it was the Zeds versus the Sivir and the Nocturne. And it was like, who's gonna win? This is crazy. And everyone like replays that clip from All-Stars. And that was a really hype moment that wouldn't have happened if I had been like, nope, balance is important. No fun allowed. And so and I also bring this up because, like, certainly T, for example, who was on the team until like halfway through set 1, he was also really good at pushing the boundaries and doing a lot of cool stuff. The item system and how it interacts with everything else was something he worked on. And so having lots of designers who are willing to like push things beyond their boundaries and come up with really fun scenarios, balanced with people who are like, okay, I see what you're trying to do. How can I make that work?
Let's edit it down a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I like this, but this can maybe wait for next set. Yeah, let's try that.
Have you ever had a time when you're like, oh man, this is awesome, but then you sort of have like the angel and the devil, and you're like, oh man, I could keep this in and it's super broken, but I really need to nerf this down a little bit.
So here's a really good example actually. Sivir, when Riot Whitrock first made Sivir, it was actually not a spell, it was passive ricochet. And she's gonna have low AD passive ricochet. And I was like, that's literally never going to work. I could make her AD 0 and I will break the game with this. Let me show you.
My computer might not be able to run that.
And we did one playtest. We did one playtest where I put 2 Titanic Hydras on Sivir, and I just went, I mean, just saying.
Oh, that's awesome.
We're testing right now.
I want that now. Now I kind of wish I didn't ask
No,
that
you
question
don't.
because now I
I'll
want.
say with Hush, you really don't. You
You don't want
really
that.
don't.
You don't
That
want
is
that,
true.
Blevins.
That is true. Oh man, that would.
So I think that kind of like. Oh, Blev, did you want to say something?
No, I didn't. I'm just thinking. I'm gonna be thinking about that Sivir with 2 Titanic Hydras for a long time now.
Well, it's just like one of those things where you just want to see it, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of my job. Is like we have a lot of really talented designers working on the sets and coming up with cool ideas. And it's my job to go, okay, I see what you're trying to do here. How do we make this work to bring out the fun while also making it work in the game? Here's how it could maybe work.
Awesome. So I think that kind of like before, we kind of sectioned out this particular episode with like where TFT started, where it's going to go, and some random things later because we all need to know which little legend tastes the best. But that is the most important question that we're going to ask you. But it will happen after the break. But to kind of close out this origins aspect, you talked about what the design team's goals were. Do you feel like you've hit most of those goals so far? And is there anything that you still feel like you're striving for? Like, is there anything that's kind of peeking out at you that's like, we still haven't solved this particular problem, but we're trying, like, we're putting a ton of resources into it right now?
So there's a bunch there, I think. From the origin side, like we set out to make a new genre of game, the random tactic battler, whatever you want to call it. I guess auto battler is what the actual name is. And I think we've succeeded in that regard. But now that we have this new genre in our hands, we're still trying to figure out exactly what's best for this genre. For example, the one that always comes up is like rate of change. Set one, we have had B patch after B patch, and every B patch was 20 things changing. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. And a lot of the more casual players were like, cool, I played a week ago, I have no idea anything works, bye, not playing. And so we've definitely toned that down. But even still, we're like trying to dissect, well, okay, what kind of change makes sense? I was having a conversation with Riot Jag at a football game, actually, and he said it really well, where he's like, actually, what I think is going on here is when you add new things to the game, players are like, cool, new things, I'm excited, I'm happy, no big deal. When you start to mess with what's familiar to them, that's where it starts to really like break the immersion and like understanding of the game. It's like, wait, I used to love running Kindred, and now 3-star Kindred's not good? What? I don't understand. And so like we're making revelations like that as we go, where it's like, oh, okay, so this genre needs this kind of thing, and so that's why I'm pretty confident like every set's going to be better than the next. But these are the kind of learnings I think that are going to be key to continuing this genre long term.
Well, if that's the case, I mean, we've said it on the show multiple times, but Set 2 has felt like a completely new game in a good way to us. And just like, I mean, how many weeks or I don't even know how long Set 2's been out at this point, but it still feels fresh to me. It still feels good in a way that like I was still into Set 1, but there were definitely times in Set 1 where I was like, okay, I'm good with where this is right now. I'm gonna step away for a second and play. Where now it's like, I mean, people are always going to complain about Blender or whatever the boogeyman is, but even that, it doesn't feel the same. It feels really good. So I just wanted to.
And using that as an example, I think one of the key learnings going from Set 1 to Set 2 was like, if anything is going to be dominant, like let's say it's Ocean Mage, like let's not pick on Blender because it's weird and buggy and whatever. Ocean Mage is a comp we definitely intended to be strong. Okay, cool. If Ocean Mage is in a dominant meta, the way the set is designed is that you can do things like Poison and Mystic. And so, okay, then the meta will shift to Poison and Mystic. And then when that happens, people will start running Rangers and Predators. And you're like, oh, okay. And so, like, that's the kind of healthy ecosystem we need to get to eventually, where it's just like, the meta sort of balances itself out.
Yeah, and it's funny because you'll see that in a lobby, right? You'll see kind of like in like a microcosm of, okay, so no one's really running this particular comp, so these comps are going to be stronger, and they happen really small. But as you expand outward in terms of design philosophy, it makes sense in terms of, okay, this could be like a self-sustaining ecosystem, right? In terms of it'll transition based off of what is strong, but what is strong is never going to be, throat on the neck type of experience.
Some of the challengers were joking around because Ace of Spades, who's a high-level challenger who puts out a bunch of videos, he had just put out a video on like how to run Blender, and then right after he put out the video, you could look up his match history, and he was playing a bunch of Wardens and Electric. Things that counter it specifically. And everyone was like, Galaxy Brain, Ace of Spades.
I know, right? Oh man, that dude's good at this game.
I always wanted to a long time ago when I was MTG was playing Paper and MTGO and all that stuff, I always wanted to get to a point where my stream got big enough where if I played a deck, people would invest in that card, and you could just Galaxy Brain. It's like, oh man, I own 10,000 Tybalt, so I'm gonna play a deck with Tybalt. I'm gonna top 8 a GP, and I'm gonna be a billionaire. It's like, yeah,
yep.
It's like
that happens in a lot of card games, where you're I'm gonna make this card happen. Right.
Oh, I thought you meant my actual thought of I'm going to be a billionaire from this card game.
Everyone's going to need this card.
Yes, everyone's going to need it. But that is a good place to put a little bit of a pin here. We're going to be back in just a minute here after the break with Mortdog. We'll see you then. If you want another way to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Little Legends Podcast and become a patron today. We've got all sorts of goals and tiers available, and we're open to suggestions as to what the other tiers should be. We'll be putting exclusive content. Videos, and other things on the Patreon, as well as giving you early looks at projects that we're working on. Head over to patreon.com/Little Legends Podcast right now. Guys, if you are liking the show, please make sure you leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to us there. And you can subscribe to us and check us live on Twitch at twitch.tv/The Blevins. Of course, the home of all of our content is at discord.me/Little Legends Podcast. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the break. We are, of course, joined here with Mortdog, and we've got some good questions. We've got the chat questions streaming in. We had a good one that kind of related back to the last segment. So this one, I'm sorry I didn't catch who said it, but they asked what was the feeling? Because obviously, you're jumping into a new game with TFT, even though it's auto chess had already been at least somewhat proven. But what was the feeling when that first sort of public release where people are waiting hours and hours to get in to the beta, and just seeing that amount of reception before the game's even released? How did that feel? What was that like in that experience early on?
Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit for the team because, like I said, I was not quite a full member at that time. But what I'll tell you is it was really interesting because auto chess was out, the team was working their butt off, and they had a set date that they wanted to get the game out by, because they're like, if we beat the competition to this genre, that'll be a big deal. Being sort of the big thing, big deal, we got to do this. And so, right when we kind of announced the game, but it wasn't playable yet, we're like, cool, here it is. It's coming, it's great. Everyone was like, sweet, we're almost at the finish line. And then Underlords announced, 2 days after? And we theorized whether or not we affected that or not, but it was whoa. And there was a lot of well, wait a minute, their UI is really crisp and clean, and ours is kind of not at the time. It's uh-oh. But Maple, who was a really good lead on the team, was like, no, we're sticking to our guns. We're doing this. I am confident in this game. It's fun. We're doing this. And from what we saw, we were we're confident in how fun this game is. So then we shipped it to PBE. Reception was what it was, and the team was like, yes, starting to be worth. This is a big deal. This is great. And I think that gave everyone the energy they needed to finish the game up and get it out the door. And it was pretty crazy, and everyone was starting to get real well, wait a minute, if it's this big, because we had numbers that we had sort of shot called where it's if the number is here, the game is we tried. And if the number is here, cool, we did it. And if the number's here, this is blowing our expectations out of the water. And at one point I heard we had doubled that top shot call.
That's crazy.
And so it was okay.
All right, we're here. Guess we're doing this thing.
Yep.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I think that that's really cool because it's cool to hear about like the infancy of a game, how it was birthed, right? It has the gestation period of what's happening. So let's talk about what's going to be going on in the future, because a lot of people, I think, even the questions that we're seeing in chat are like esports based and release based, mobile based, right? So let's go ahead and get into the nitty gritty of that. So to start things off, something that we're all really excited about is mobile TFT, right? We all finally can have an excuse to take 30-minute long poops again, right? I mean, obviously that's the main core design philosophy at Riot Games for TFT, right? I mean, I don't want to speak for your team, but I'm sure that's part of it. Cool. Yeah, we're on the same page. But in terms of a game like this, it's so funny because when I see questions like how does mobile change the design philosophy of TFT, I don't really see like, okay, the board on the phone versus the computer. I don't see why it should be different. So can you illuminate to me how mobile changes the design of TFT for the future, right? Because you're obviously going into it. Mobile's huge in in countries in Asia, and people are going to have a lot more access to it, and it's super exciting. But does that change anything about the design philosophy of TFT for the future?
Yeah. So I think with mobile, I think sort of the obvious thing was like, hey, bigger market, right? Like with any game, you want to have sort of a bigger potential market. So that more people can play the game, and the more people play the game, the healthier it'll be. So cool. Mobile is a pretty obvious example. And with TFT in particular, it's like, porting League to mobile is obviously going to have its own challenges because the control scheme is different and things like that. But with TFT, it's like, no, this all works on mobile. Great. So like porting it over shouldn't be too bad. There are obviously some challenges, UI space, things like that. But overall, should work pretty straightforward. Now, from there, there's a bunch of decisions that could be made. For example, let's say we were like, okay, we're making mobile, and it's the most important thing. What we would probably do is we would say, okay, game time. Game time needs to go down pretty heavily. Or we would say something like, hey, mobile screen space is limited. We should probably go back to 3 rows so that we can fit more board into the space. Those would be the kind of calls we could make. But with this, I think we're being pretty clear that like our design philosophy is we've got an established audience that is happy, and that's good. They like the game, cool. Mobile should be about growing that audience to finding more people that will like this game. Not changing the game to mess with people who are already existing, but find more people like that. And so every decision we're making is like, don't sacrifice the game quality as is on PC, but still try to expand the audience. And so an example is like, hey, in the back of our mind, yeah, game time going down would be a good thing, but we're not going to like double player damage to force that.
Right.
That's just not something we're willing to do, And so, like I said, the design philosophy is keep the core game what it is, it's good, successful, while using mobile to expand the audience.
I'm just really hoping that we're not going to see 58 different currencies, like a lot of other mobile games. It's like, oh, to create this brand, you need 58 crystals and then 14 metal crystals. It's like, oh.
Are there any plans to monetize TFT outside of those eggs? Like, because it is going to mobile. I'm sure some people have questions about that.
Yeah, so definitely there is some plans, and you're kind of mentioning the crystals and sort of joking about the monetization. The one thing I'll say is like there is an expectation of mobile games, especially of mobile game markets, to have a progression system. Like that's almost a must in mobile games, and we have that really, really lightly right now with the free pass. And when I say really lightly, I think we all can agree that that's like real light,
lighter than air. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think at some point we will need to expand that, but I definitely think, again, we're trying to make games we enjoy as well. I don't think we want to have, you must log in every day and play 3 games. No, thank you. So nothing like that. As far as the question of monetization goes, one of the things, so I worked on skins on League of Legends for a while. That was what I did when I first got to Riot. So I did things like loot, events, stuff like that. One of the things we learned is like you really have to draw a clear line between rewards that are like freebies and rewards that are clearly meant to monetize, especially because you have a free game. Yeah. So for example, Little Legends, people always talk about like, oh, I'd love to get a free little legend for hitting Challenger this season. And it's like, I get that you would, but if we gave that to you, you'd kind of never buy one. And to keep the game alive, we do have to make money. So little legends and maps are going to be one of those things. And when I say maps, I mean like the higher quality, the Freljord ones.
Yeah.
Because even that's actually a debatable one where it's like, well, wait, why would I buy the Freljord one when I have the cool ocean one?
Because the Freljord ones are awesome. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. We do have to draw that clear distinction where it's like, we have to make money somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the other ththings we'll probably be exploring at some point is a paid version of a progression system, battle pass kind of thing.
Like Apex has.
Yep.
Yeah.
That'll be your choice. Again, like nothing, obviously no pay for power, but we'll probably be exploring something like that. But other than that, we probably don't want to do much more than that because we're not trying to like be one of those games that's like, here's a million things to buy. It's like, no, our focus is a fun game, and if you want to support us, here's some cool stuff to buy.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I have no problem with there being more things to buy. I just hate the confusion of like, I actually because of one of your tweets, I actually started playing Puzzles and Dragons again, and there's 5,000 different currencies and like a bunch of things, and like I don't even mind like I have a job, I have disposable income. I don't mind paying for things that I like. I've spent more money than I'm willing to admit on Little Legends eggs and Freljord skins already. I just don't want like like 3 different types of crystals to do like certain things, and then you always end up with like 17 crystals at the end. It's like, oh, come on.
Agreed. I mean, every time, so when I was working on loot stuff for League of Legends, like one of the scariest things was every time it was like, and we'll need a new currency. And you're just like, no, find a way to do it without that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand. Like, the more you add, right, then it becomes more to manage. And the last thing you want is for every time you open up your game to have to, like, work, right? It's like, okay, I have to farm this to buy this in order to get an extra game here. And eventually that becomes the game. You're not playing the game anymore, right? You're farming currency. And I'm glad that you guys are actively trying to avoid that, because I will spend hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars on Little Legends, right? Like, no problem. I know it's just a digital thing, but I mean, I'm gonna buy Little Legends, whether you like it or not. And it's good to see that you guys know that too, right? It's just like, all right, this is how we're going to keep our ecosystem going to keep this game going into 2020, which is tomorrow, which is nuts. It's a new decade. So what are some of your guys' goals? Like, we know that there's mobile. There are things like spectator client that a lot of people are asking for. Is there going to be one for mobile? I'm sure you know all the questions. So let's lay it all out now in terms of goals for 2020. What can you tell us?
Okay, well, I mean, obviously there's the big ones, right? Like we've got mobile. We'll need to launch set 3. Our typical plan right now is about 3 sets per year. So if we look at 2020, we're looking at set 3, set 4, set 5. So all of that has to be done. From a gameplay standpoint, the big thing here is like continuing to learn what makes the game tick, what makes it grow. Because again, I talk about things like rate of change. We've been talking about like a lot of interviews lately that set 2 has ended up less flashy and less viewable than set 1, for example. So while it is better from like a gameplay balance standpoint, it's been worse from that regard. So it's like, okay, we've learned what worked, what didn't, time to move it forward. And I always compare this to Magic again, because like you look at some early Magic sets and they're pretty bad, but like you got to walk before you can run. And so learning some of that will be good. And then, there's lots of features. Like I literally spent some time over my break just making a list of stuff that's like things I want to get done in the game. Spectator's one that comes up obviously a lot. I think as soon as some of the engineers free up from mobile, we'll get on Spectator. The nice thing, Maple tells me that once we do Spectator, we get replays for free because they're similar tech. So like that's pretty cool.
I mean, it only took regular League of Legends like 8 years for that. So I think you got a little bit of buffer time.
Yeah. We have announced that there will be a competitive scene. I don't know much about it, so I can't really provide much insight there, but there will be a competitive scene in 2020, so that should be exciting. And then just figuring out how to improve various, like again, I'm the math systems designer, so like I look at things like the carousel and I'm like, that could be so much better. Can we do all this stuff to it? Yeah, so lots of little things here and there, but overall goal is release all those big things and grow the game.
Awesome. Well, and I just have to give compliments out to you guys in general. Something that we talk about on the show, and it's not just to blow hot air up your ass. It's for real. I've been in the gaming industry for a bit as a personality, and I've worked at some game studios in the past, and even my own studio wasn't and I was the person that was supposed to do this. Wasn't
Wait,
as like
Are you?
I know,
are you
right? I was the
digging
community
yourself right
person.
now?
No, but what I'm saying is you guys are some of the most responsive and most inclusive developers when it comes to your game.
Mhm.
And that's something that I know is going to come in 2020. And I know is a philosophy for you guys because I think you do such a great job in drawing that line of we understand that you guys are opinionated or have strong feelings about this, but on the design team and what our philosophy is, we have to make these kinds of choices. But like you guys are so good at letting us know that we've been heard, right? You've made changes based off of the things that the community has said. But I'm sure that kind of creates a little bit of a difficult situation when it comes to relationship with your community in that way. Where do you draw the line, right? Because I think Kazakhstan is the easiest example of I think that's probably the most emotional this community ever was, right? Was when that was super, super big, in terms of negative feelings. Where do you draw the line of, okay, if we listen too much to the community, then we give up some of our power, but they're obviously frustrated.
Okay, I'm going to be a little more open than I probably should here. In a way, that is a really hard question for me because, in particular, right now, I get it from both sides. I have the community going, "Why don't you listen to us? You never listen." There was a tweet like 3 days ago where I guess some French streamer, I don't know his name off the top of my head,
I saw that tweet. I almost.
but it was basically like,
in.
"Why don't you talk to real players? You never listen. We need more patches. You're terrible." At the same time, actually, from some of the designers on my team, I'm being accused of listening to the community too much, basing my decisions off the community and not actually designing enough.
That sucks, dude. That's a really shitty position to be in. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna be empathetic to your cause. Yeah.
And it's my job to prove to them that, like, no, while I'm listening to the community, it is a point of data, and I'm using it with all these other points of data to come up to the best informed decision possible. Void Assassin was an example where it was like, I listened to the community. I know they wanted it destroyed. Then I looked at the data we had, and the data we had was like, it was in the like, God, it wasn't even in the top half of like performing comps. And I was like, can I really nerf something that's like not doing that well? And so that's where I made the inconsistent line that got memed for God knows how long.
We were part of that.
Yeah,
apologies. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And what's interesting is like, sure enough, like what ended up happening was like more people caught on to it. We learned about how even if a comp isn't performing a certain way at that time, people then bandwagon and it starts to perform better. And we learned how bandwagon can affect performance metrics. But yeah, and so like it's definitely a tough thing. And all I can do is, or at least the thing that has helped me get through both sides, is continue to just be open and honest and be like, look, I'm here, I hear you, but here's why I can't. And if that's not good enough for some people, I have to accept that. There are going to be some people that are just so mad and so angry no matter what you say. Sorry. And it's the same with like the designers on the team. Like oftentimes I have to rephrase because like Riot Jag's a really good friend of mine, and I started a conversation with him about Soulbound after coming back from All Stars, and I was like, yeah, I was talking to the influencers, and here's what we thought we need to change. He's like, okay, cool, you're just listening to the influencers, that's not good. I'm like, okay, let me rephrase that. I came to this conclusion because of this. And some of the points of data were this, and like even just the way you approach the conversation can mean a lot. And so tactics like that have been a learning experience for me. And to be frank, like I don't know, like I am being pretty open with the community. Maybe it's not the right play. I don't know. It's just something I'm trying. Maple's been real supportive. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing is, when I was a teacher, I was definitely a bad cop more than I was a good cop. But you don't have to talk to the, that's the thing, right? Like, you're hearing it from some of your coworkers. It's like you don't necessarily have to even interact as much as you're doing now, right? I feel like what you're doing is extra. Like I think you kind of
It is not part of my job requirements. No one's telling me to do it.
Yeah, you're saying it
It's
much
just
better than me.
something I do because, again, when I'm a fan of a game, I wish they would talk to me and be like, "Hey, why is it like this?" I'm gonna pick on Hearthstone a bit. Really good game, nothing against them, but like, there were definitely days where I'm like, "Tell us why you won't change this."
Machine Gun Priest is awful. Why do you keep doing this to us?
Quest Rogue.
Oh my god. Oh, we're just gonna go down
No.
each time.
I loved Quest Rogue, by the way. I was a filthy Quest Rogue player.
The thing about Quest Rogue is I appreciated, it's it's talking about how like way earlier in the podcast already. It's like I appreciated the attempt, right? But I think they needed to edit it down a little bit, right? They colored outside the lines a little bit too much on that one. I think.
I'm a combo player from MTG. I love Splinter Twin, but we won't go down that line. But I loved Quest Rogue, and I just want to make one point because I did see that thread with that streamer, and I literally had like 150 character tweet like ready to go, and I'm like, I'm gonna use my better judgment, and I'm gonna just because it's like. It's one thing if you disagree, and we've had disagreements with things that have happened in TFT, or maybe not even disagreements, but we've had criticisms or discussions about them, and I think we try to be reasonable, but we're never like, oh well, you know what, Mort's an idiot because he's not even listening. It's like it's one thing even if you disagree, but to say that you're not listening and that you don't talk to real players, who are the real players? I can say from personal experience, because I am in a lot. I watch way more TFT streams than I will admit because I'll probably get fired from my actual day job if I admit the real number. Okay. But you are in those streams as much as I am. I see you are in those streams too.
I jump in them a lot.
You are there for those players. And like, I literally see that happen. So that is,
I mean, you're here right now.
I mean, and I'm sorry, I had to get like that was like the day after Christmas or the day before Christmas too, and I was like sitting in my girlfriend's family's like living room, just like furiously typing, and then I looked it over and I'm like, it's Christmas. I need to just
part of this is also like it is the job, right? Like I mean, I'm the design lead. I am not the person doing all the work. There's a whole team behind me of hardworking people. And Leadership 101 basically says, like, when things are done well, the team did a great job. And it's true. Like, it's got a team making a great set. Witty and the team made a bunch of cool champions, cool spells. And when things go wrong, it's the lead's fault because the lead let it happen. And that's, like I said, it's basic Leadership 101. And so if people are mad about a particular thing, cool. That's part of the job, And got to do it.
I mean, I don't think a lot of other devs would have released every single Thieves' Gloves possibility on their Twitter twice. You know what I mean? Like, that's not information that we necessarily need, but we have. And like the professor is saying, I think it makes us a little bit more close-knit, right? I think secrets are a way to build friendships, unfortunately, or fortunately, right? Information is currency in everything, right? And so if we know more, the community, I think, feels trusted with that information, and we feel validated when we say some of like the whole like Kazakhstan thing when you responded to to our tweet and I went on this tirade about the Zephyr thing, right?
You were awful, man. You were awful, Boop.
And you still responded and you were like, sorry about the Zephyr thing, blah blah blah, right? It's like you didn't have to do that, but you did, and I think that is unique to maybe you and your team, and that made me feel a part of this community just like everywhere else. And I think the thing with Auto Battlers, because it is new, you guys get to decide what this is like, and every community that I've been a part of in terms of TFT has been so supportive, so open, so so family like, right? And I think that really does come from the top down. And so I think that's kind of like me appreciating that you do know where to draw the line. You actually said, I was in debate. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so politics is in my blood, unfortunately. And you actually are doing something, when you're saying, oh, I hear you, I want to be empathetic. You're asking the questions, you're acknowledging the response, but you're also adapting it to a point where it's like, but this is what it has to be, right? You have to make a decision. And I think you guys are doing that really, really well. So from us and at least our little Legends community, we really appreciate that you guys are leading that charge as well.
Yeah, and like I said, the whole team is just excited to have a passionate community behind them, keeps them energetic, keeps us working to make new things. So
yeah. Speaking of new things, though, this is a question that I've brought up many a time on the podcast. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And Lev, jump in if you have anything here, because I think this is, like, in terms of philosophy, something that's really interesting. So I think, and this is just me personally, we're talking about 2020 again, and so let's talk about Legends Runeterra, right? So I think the player base is similar. Right. I know you guys probably have data that, says these people are, this, you talked about insights earlier, but are you guys worried at all about Legends of Runeterra and TFT kind of cannibalizing each other?
I don't think so. And that's not just me spouting the company line. The thing I've been pretty clear on is that I don't think TFT is a game that has to be a lifestyle game, right? It doesn't have to be the game that you constantly play every day all the time. And so, sort of like Magic and other things like that, a new set comes out. Maybe you play it for a month and you're like, that was cool. And then you move on. And then you come back 2 months later with a new set and you're like, that was fun again. I really enjoyed it. And then you leave. And like, that's okay. We don't need every second of every day of your time. And so, Legends of Runeterra is another game. And honestly, it's a game that similar people may like. And so, I think what would be silly of us would be to like, release sets for both games at the exact same time. That would be pretty stupid. But for example, let's say we release a set and then 2 months later they release a set. Like, cool, you're bouncing between the games, you're having a good time. Or maybe you like Legends of Runeterra and not TFT or whatever. Like, cool, as long as you're happy playing games, Riot's happy. And so, are there similarities? Yeah, sure. But we've already seen, like, I'm going to pick on Dog and Hafu for a bit. Like, Dog and Hafu both play the same kind of game, but we've seen Dog gravitate towards Hearthstone Battleground, whereas Hafu has stayed with TFT. And like, cool, that's great. As long as everyone's playing games,
it's good for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because I'm more invested in TFT now, but I am definitely, coming from a Magic background, going to be invested in both Runeterra and TFT. And I mean, from the entity of Riot in general, they're obviously going to be happy that I'm going to be playing their games regardless of which one it is. But no, that's good. That's good to know, because it is, I mean, we talked about it before, and it's like, well, when we first saw Runeterra announced, it was like, well, Runeterra was clearly a game that they had decided was a game. It's a separate thing. It is a full game. There's a full team.
Oh yeah, that art is amazing.
It is crazy. The full 9 on that. And TFT is also a great game, but it is inside of League of Legends. It, as you mentioned, like, exploded kind of in terms of your expectations. So it wasn't Riot going, okay, we're gonna have 2 strategy games coming out in roughly the same time. It was, we're going to have one, and then this other one came up and exploded. So it's good to hear
We've heard rumors too of other developers that were like, okay, Auto Jit Battler, we should make one, but we've got lots of time. And then they're like, wait, Riot made another game quickly? What?
What happened? Yeah, I think someone actually in the chat said this was like, it's something that's very different between those two things too is, at least again, this is just my opinion, Legends of Runeterra, like Blev said, was going to be a thing. There's obviously, and we've spoken about this on the podcast, and when it comes to developing like a competitive ecosystem and the future spectator modes and stuff like that, why haven't they come earlier than we had anticipated. Is I've always thought, my theory was that everything's been kind of reactionary, right? Like, you guys said it double exceed
Uh-huh.
expectation thing, right?
Yep.
So everything feels really reactionary. It's like, now that we have the player base, we can do this now. Would that be accurate
Yeah.
versus Legends of Runeterra that kind of already has all of this in there?
Yep. That would be 100% accurate. We are
Okay.
playing catch up, and sometimes we're actually paying the cost of going quick, right? Like even something as simple as like our item system, the way it was put together early on was, to use an analogy with like twigs and rubber band and some glue and some love, and hopefully it sticks together. And we've recently had to go back and like, wait, if we're going to keep this long term, kind of need to make it more stable. And so we've been paying a bit of a dev cost to like go back and make sure it's in here for the long haul. I think League of Legends had a similar thing. Maybe still does. Cough, cough, client, cough, cough.
One day, man, it'll happen, I'm sure.
Yeah. But that's just, we do what we can. And I still think it was the right call because, again, people are playing a game now instead of playing a game 2 years from now. And, I think people don't play a game to have a perfectly scripted client. They play a game because the game is fun.
Mm-hmm.
The client's nice, but
For sure. This is kind of a combo question, and I know you've actually touched on this in your streams before, but just for the podcast audience, I know you've talked about different ways to play, and more specifically, different ways to play with friends. One thing we've talked about on the show is, yes, Boop and I can go into a game and play a ranked game together, and if we're the same exact rank or very close, it's an okay experience, but we're still fighting against each other, right? And like, even though I'm a filthy degenerate and I want to take LP from Boop, most people probably don't want to steal LP from their friends when they're playing. So can you kind of elaborate on at least the thought process behind either like a team mode or a way to play with friends that is more cooperative rather than
so this has been an interesting problem. This is like, certainly, again, we hear the community, a lot of people have been asking for the 2v2v2v2 mode, and in fact, Ananda, one of our new designers who joined us from the Legends of Runeterra team, has sort of been tasked with this particular problem. So we've been doing some research because, again, we agree that like if the example I always use is like, so me and my wife could play TFT together, right? And I say her in particular because she hasn't played yet, and like that, like take that skill differential. How do they enjoy the game together? And so we've looked at some other competitors. For example, Underlord did their 2v2v2 mode, and we're like, that's probably not right for TFT. I don't know if you've ever played it, but some of their rules are just like, they're complicated. I think challenger players would like it. Not many other people would. So we've been doing our own research into like, what does our version look like? We actually had one pitch we were kind of happy with, but the more we look at it, we're like, I don't think this is really going to land where we need it to. So right now we're kind of back at the drawing board on that, but it is something we're definitely interested in. And again, this goes back to resources where it might be a year before we get to it. Hopefully not, but maybe. But finding what's good for TFT to get people to play together is definitely something we want.
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely. I mean, TFT does cover a large swath of different players, and being able to play with a friend who's just learning or something like that is definitely something that we're gonna want. So that's good to know that is
some of my favorite times has been like driving my friends, like spectating them and being like, okay, now buy this, and this is why. Right, I'm not the one playing, and like I'm helping, I get to play with someone else. And so I think I think like another really big question in terms of, and we touched on it on the pre-show. So in terms of community and feedback, and we're moving backwards a little bit, but I think it's good, is who are we listening to, right? Like, someone in the chat was like, hey, does it have any weight to be a challenger in TFT, right? Who are you designing for? What is that philosophy? Because your core group is going to be the ones that are advertising your game on Twitch, right? Those challengers are going to be the ones that are bringing in those viewers. So do you make the game for them so you keep them, or do you and this is like an age-old game development question,
Yep.
right? Are you balancing to the top 1%? You're balancing to, the other 99 because
Well,
they all
so I'm
right?
going to call you out on that because there's actually two different questions in there. I don't know if you realized you asked.
Okay.
Because the first is who do we make the game for, and the second is who do we balance the game for.
Yes. Yep. Very good. I'm glad you called me out.
Yeah, because who do we make the game for? The answer is we make the game for everyone. Everyone should be able to enjoy it. So, for example, an example would be like maybe we should make a tutorial. Challenger players don't give a shit if we make a tutorial, and like that doesn't mean we're not listening to them. It just means we have to make the game for everybody. And so there will be features and things that are needed for everyone to enjoy the game. This is why there's map skins to collect and other things like that. So we are making the game for everybody. Who are we balancing it for? Like I said with the Olaf thing earlier, that's been kind of the interesting debate. My philosophy, and again, some of the designers on the team don't agree with this. This is something, but right now I get to make that call. Is I am designing the game because there is not much of an actual APM check, execution check. I am balancing the game as if robots were playing it. So it's like if you had robots that would like synergistically try to beat each other up and find the optimal thing, what is balance? Mm-hmm. And that is what I've been trying to balance around. And so when challenger players give me their feedback and they're like, this is not balanced and here's why, that definitely holds more weight than, say, a silver player going, Olaf is overpowered, please nerf or I quit the game. That definitely has more weight. But when a challenger player says, we desperately need 2v2v2v2 exactly like Underlords, I'm like, I'm not sure that's correct, and here's why. So again, definitely holds weight, but the other thing, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, but oftentimes challenger players are very, very engaged. They play a lot, and they can get very hyperbolic about various things. They jump to conclusions fairly quickly sometimes, and so we have to be careful that information, while being given from the goodness of their heart, is correct. Need to do a little bit of research.
Yeah, I was told by my father back in the day. I remember I was really little, and I was a musician. I was a music major in college, and I had gotten like a really bad audition. I was like in 5th grade, and he was like, "Remember, feedback. You don't need to be a sponge, be a filter, right? Because everyone has their biases towards how they give it, right? It's because of what they want. And if you take all the feedback all the time, you're never going to change, right? Because you never know which is going to be best for you. So it seems like you're kind of taking that same philosophy when it comes to, okay, challenger players know a lot about the mechanics of the game, but since they're so close, it's why doctors and psychologists can't work on their family, right? Because of that closeness, it's going to be a little bit difficult to like separate that emotion from it.
Yeah, I'll call out like Delicious Milk, for example, who's been like the #1 player for a long time. Super passionate player, but like he gets real energetic real quick, and it's like, he plays Shadow once, gets 5th, and says Shadow's the worst, please buff, and it's like, maybe not yet.
I was gonna say, Cloud9 Soju, K3 Soju jumps out to me because I'm pretty sure I've seen him say that Rangers are both busted and also unplayable in the same game that he's played. And he's flipped multiple times. Like he's very, I think he does it on purpose because it's funny, but so that's one thing. But Boop, that actually reminds me of a thing, a piece of wisdom that my father actually gave me. And he said, Blev, yes, he calls me by my last name, even though that's also his last name. Don't ever read Reddit.
Nice.
It was very.
I thought you were going to say something like, "You can eat corn twice."
Oh, and I'm out.
Can I go watch Games Done Quick real quick?
Can I delete? I'm Googling how to delete a podcast.
Can I?
Not just this episode, the entire podcast and all history of it. But I thought we could go through a whole episode without talking about something that made me want to vomit. But here we are.
I've done my job.
Let's get back into at least something related to gaming or not related to that. One question again, I've heard you kind of gloss around on your streams is things like the elemental hexes and are those looking to be something that's kind of like an evergreen mechanic in the sense that we'll see something like that in every set? And then to kind of piggyback off of that, I had some questions come in about positioning. And if you look at the difference between set 1 and set 2, positioning, you can argue one is more important than the other in terms of the difference, but they're certainly different. Where we're positioning against Hextech, we're positioning very specifically versus Assassins in set 1 versus all that. Is there, how do you feel about how positioning has played out in set 2?
Okay. So I think there were like three
There's
questions.
probably 3 or 4 different questions there.
Okay, so first off, let's talk about set mechanics. Elemental hexes have done their job pretty well. They're a pretty simple mechanic, and the goal of them was to make each game play out differently. And in that regard, they've been a success, right? Like Senna on an Ocean game is like, whoa, she instacasts, which makes her way more valuable. Great. So some games with Ocean, you want to run Senna, whereas you wouldn't run Senna on a Cloud game. Cool. Because again, our goal was like, we want to make sure that if you look up a guide, it's not always the right answer. And so in that regard, that has helped. Cough, cough, blender, not necessarily 100%, but it has helped. And so we want a core mechanic like that in every set that, again, makes each game feel different, adds to the replayability of the game. We think that's healthy. Now, will elemental hexes stick around? Realistically, probably not. We'd probably come up with a new mechanic for each set. But that being said, if we found a mechanic that we're like, okay, this is just so good, it'll stay around. And what's interesting about elemental hexes is it might be there. We might not know it. And I think it's going to take a set of it being off to learn whether or not that's true. Like, it certainly feels better than set 1. That's true. But set 3's mechanic could be even better, and so elemental hexes aren't necessary. Or set 3's mechanic might be a miss, and we're like, God, I miss elemental hexes.
That's so funny you're saying that, because Lev and I are really closely associated with another game, Overwatch, and we had a meta called Goats that everyone hated when it was there. And then now that we're away from it, all of a sudden Goats is like the best meta Overwatch has ever had. You know what I mean? It was like...
Yep.
We've been around the block. I've been doing the competitive Overwatch podcast since 2015, and it's funny when you see new groups of people. I mean, we're even seeing it now with TFT being such a new game. When you see new groups of people come in and they're like, "Oh my God, Blender is so broken." It's like, well, do you remember when it was this? Do you remember when the meta was this? And it's like,
back in my day, Pepperidge Farm.
Well, it's always funny because a lot of times, to the credit of game developers, they do things that change the thing that people didn't like before, and then it's exactly those changes that people don't like now, and they're like, oh, well, we wish that it was like this. We wish that Widowmaker was good again. It's like, okay, well, then they made Widowmaker good. It's like, oh, well, Widowmaker, Mercy's broken. It's like, okay, well, we put a bunch of shields in. Oh, we hate shields. What are you doing? It's like, you're never happy. And like, I'm not even a game developer, and I see this, so or game designer, I can only imagine what it's like on your end.
Well, and certainly that's why our goal is definitely not make everyone happy, because that would be an impossible goal that would drive me insane.
Yeah.
But, like I always joke that like 915's Karthus is like my biggest mistake on TFT. It's just like, so the rule is don't do that again. But yeah, so as far as systems go, like I said, we're always looking for the next thing, and if it's good enough, it'll come back and stick around. And but like I said, to really know for sure, I think we're going to need to go a set without elemental hexes to be like, God, we really just need those back, and we need to get rid of Mountain and add a different one instead and call them something else. And great, cool. So then there was the question about positioning. Positioning has been a hot topic. No pun intended. Hot topic amongst the design team right now, because we're working on set 3. And we also, when we went to All Stars, we talked to a lot of influencers, and they had similar conversations. We do have the bigger board now, which is good, but positioning this set feels less important. Why is that? Our current belief, or at least my current belief, is that this actually has to do less with the board size and more to do with champion abilities. For example, something as simple as Kassadin, who, and I'm not Void Kassadin, but just Kassadin,
good old fashioned,
whose job was to auto attack somebody and make them cast less quickly. The position that you placed him could change the outcome of a fight, because you hit their Sejuani or you hit their Cho'Gath and it didn't ult as quick. and that was huge. And we don't have as many of those this set. In fact, a lot of our spells this set are like random. Like Talia stuns a random unit, and I've had a few challenger players be like, that actually feels like Phantom, where it's like, if she stuns my carry, guess I lose. And so I think when we're coming up with spells for set 3, we need to have more positioning tactics. Now, I can't spoil anything yet, but for example, we actually, when we were doing the items for 10-1, we ended up making 3 items that were so good, we've decided to hold them off till set 3, which I know sounds weird, but they're very disruptive and interesting. And one of them in particular has this cool new targeting paradigm that's very position-based. And so it's like, we'll be looking to make adjustments like that, where the positioning matters more to the outcome of the fight in a way that feels natural. And like I said, the bigger board allows us to do some things like that. We just didn't quite execute it as well as we could have in set 2.
That's very interesting, actually. And I mean, one of the items that I know you have talked about extensively in the past before it was really even used was Zephyr. And that is one that is, it's kind of eye-opening. The first time that you really get someone with a Zephyr, it's like, oh, this is amazing. And then also like it even has that, like, it's got the obvious one, like, okay, I'm going to hit their, their carry and they're not going to be in. And then by the time they come back, they're dead. But it's also like, I've hit the wrong champion. Like, I picked the champion and it hit the champion I picked, but my decision was wrong. And I was like, oh, that was a huge learn. And it's like, I'm not an amazing player, but there's there's few times where I'm like, oh, I learned something extremely new and valuable there. And Zephyr and that sort of positioning is one.
Certainly T gets the credit for making Zephyr, but Zephyr is single-handedly, I think, the best item design-wise for TFT, and one of the things that separates us from other auto battlers, because it adds such an element of skill and decision-making and mind games.
Totally agree.
Such a good item.
Okay, so just real quick, let's talk about the other side of that equation, at least my opinion. I have very strong, I've said a lot about Ionic Spark, just in general. When you're rewarded just for having, right? It's kind of like, oh, I have Ionic Spark, or I have this, now I have damage. And you've actually mentioned in the past that Ionic Spark is something that you guys are looking at. When you think of Zephyr and you talk about how good that item is because it's so fun and interactive, the wonderful saying in game development, why are there items like Zephyr and Static Shiv that, feel a little bit more, I have it now, it's a good thing?
Well, so let's be clear. I think Zephyr is a really good item, but if every item was Zephyr, the game would be terrible.
Yeah,
I think we can all agree on that.
Yes.
So you're going to need your sort of base items that are simple, easy to understand. I think Static Shiv's a great example of this, right? It's like, you buy Static Shiv, it does damage, and you put it on things that attack faster and it does more damage. Yay! It's flashy and exciting. You need those kind of items in the game. And at least Static Shiv has an interesting decision of like, do I put it on a ranger? Do I put it on somebody who benefits from the tier to get the extra mana? Like, there are interesting decisions there. Ionic Spark, as much as I personally don't like the item, because as you said, it's literally like, it exists. I know when it worked on the bench, that was the worst. But even that has an interesting decision of like, well, wait, do I put it on the Kog'Maw because it'll likely stay alive longer? Or do I put it on the Skarner because it shields itself because the Kog'Maw might get assassinated? So at least that had some level of decision-making that we were like borderline okay with it. Now, that being said, in 10-1, Ionic Spark is changing to have a limited range, so there's even more decision-making now.
Nice.
But yeah, and so like I said, you do need a wide variety of types of items. So
I personally loved the stacking Ionic Sparks and, of course, Boop's favorite Yordles. Just getting nothing but.
I hear the word Yordles, and this has been like, it's not TFT. Like, Yordles have this ability to just cause me to enter a rage, and like that's their design, right? That's the point. Like, when you face Teemo, like, you are a sociopath if you're facing a Teemo, and you're like, this is great. I'm having a lot of fun.
Nice. Even something like Ionic Spark, it's interesting because it was originally designed as one of the items that would A, counter frequent spell casts, but B, we do think there's some value in a fantasy where like there's a build that you're like, I'm just really tanky and resilient and I outlast you, and like that kind of comp has to exist. Because one of the other things like we have to be careful is every comp can't be a front line with backline damage, right? That just kind of like plows into each other. There has to be interesting ways to win. This is why Glacial has stuck around so long, even though it's clearly been a point of frustration, is like, this is a comp that doesn't outdamage you, it just holds you in place. And so we are still looking for more of those kind of win conditions. Ionic Spark was one that was supposed to help enable one of those.
Yeah, it's so funny because just today I was playing Pokemon and I forget the name of the Pokemon. It looked like a mushroom, but all of the abilities were healing abilities. So what it did was it took all of like, how each move has a certain number that you can do. It took all of that away from me and I was like, oh my God, right? This is like a legitimate strategy that, Pokemon is using. That's kind of what you're speaking to. It's just like, damage is damage, but how cool is it if, we just win a war of attrition instead, right? Or, I've always loved, I loved playing brawlers back in set 1 because I just like, I loved playing Cho'Gath back in the day because it's just like a little mini game of how much health they can have, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and just outlast you.
The common one is like Magic the Gathering, the blue player, right? Like you need the blue player, as frustrating as they are to face sometimes.
Yeah, you gotta. They still exist.
They exist. A lot of the degenerate high level players are those types of players for sure.
Yep.
We are running quickly out of time. We still have a little bit left, so let's jump in and get some of these more. I guess I just put them under random, but they're kind of all over the place. One I wanted to start out with, and I don't recall if you've touched on this or not, but one thing that has come up just specifically from our game nights is. And you've done this on stream too, is like these wacky games, right? Where one is like you can't level up. You've done that, and you can't roll. And the one that we do is it's got a bunch of rules. But is there any thought to having like maybe like a sandbox mode or something like that where we can change the actual rules of TFT and play in that?
So I'm trying to break this down because like when you use the term sandbox, typically people think like practice tool, and I know that's not what you're asking.
Well, I mean, that could also be a thing.
Well, so practice tool, we've been pretty clear that like we're not going to do that because part of the excitement is chasing after that 3-star Lux, and that time when you get it, it's a huge momentous occasion. And next time you want to get it with a different Lux and different item. And if you could literally just load up a tool and try it out, it loses all its excitement.
That is very
interesting. I never thought about that. That's so true.
Well,
though.
I mean, I still have the bounty out for 3-star Maokai with 2 mage caps,
Malphite.
or Malphite. Yeah, not Maokai. Yeah, no, it was it was Maokai with 2 mage
caps. We got the one in the podcast,
so that people will try to do that against me. No, it was a 5-head move, but yeah.
Yeah, and so like again, if you can load up a tool and just do that, then it loses all of its excitement and luster. So we're just not interested in doing that. Now, the other thing you're describing, though, you called it sandbox. I'll equate it to like Smash Brothers with like the custom brawl.
Yes.
Where you can like change the rules, and they had like the flower brawl and percent.
Yeah.
I personally think something like that would be very beneficial. Realistically, on the priority list, it's going to be really small. We've learned from League of Legends that like custom games have definitely a dedicated audience, but a very, very small audience. And so realistically, when it comes to like business, using your resources to get the best return, unfortunately, it's not a very big return. Now, all that being said, I still think there's something there of like, the best example is like Hearthstone's Tavern Brawl, where it's like slight modifications can do some really fun things. And we've also talked about like bringing back set 1, for example, for like limited times. I think there's something there of like, hey, cool set comes back with set 1 and you can't level. Cool, have it for 2 days. That could be kind of neat. And again, I'm kind of just spitballing ideas.
Yeah, that would have been awesome during our 3-week break a little earlier before Ranked came out.
True.
That would have been awesome.
But I mean, like again, we're playing catch up, and so these are features, even if they're a year or 2 down the road, could add some longevity to the game. And you talk about ways to play with less skilled players. Jumping into a less serious mode might be a good area to do that. So
Yeah. Speaking of beginner, are there going to be anything like in terms of onboarding new players? Someone mentioned in the chat that it can be pretty difficult to like just get into a game, and if someone's not like just grab the Infernos, right,
Yep.
or just grab Wardens and to see how it works, right?
Yeah.
Because you're kind of just like thrown into the wolves with TFT. Is there any plans to help out with that? I was assuming something with mobile, but
Yeah, the mobile team is actually working on some onboarding as well. So especially that audience will probably need a little bit more hand-holding than the PC audience. All that being said, though, a lot of people jump to like a game needs a tutorial, and it's like it's not actually true. Or if anything, you have to be a really well-designed tutorial. I did the because like a lot of the times people are like, oh, tutorials need a lot of text, and it's like, nope. You know what players don't like to do? Read at all.
True.
And so I actually got to work and design the new League of Legends tutorial and use what I learned at Nintendo to do that. And it's like, if you go back and look at the League of Legends tutorial now, it's actually really interesting because it doesn't tell you anything until you don't do anything. And it's like, oh, we noticed you're struggling to move. Here's a little right-click icon. Oh, because something I learned from a PopCap GDC talk was like, if you can get a player to do something once, they'll learn it forever. If you ask them to read something, they'll never learn it.
True.
it's not just players. I think that's me.
That's
I
just
mean,
life.
every
That's just
aspect of
in
my
general.
life. Yeah, if there wasn't a SparkNotes version of the book in high school, I just like wasn't gonna do well that chapter for that part of English.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, okay, so let's one last philosophical thing before we get into some of the funnier stuff.
Sure.
Something that we have talked about on the podcast before, and I think in terms of meta, is do you guys have like a preferred way to play the game, right? Or how you want people to interact with the game at first? Because we've talked about things. I think the term we use is the perfect meta, right? Is Blender part of that, or is hyper rolling, the way to play TFT? And I know the answer is there are many different ways to play TFT, but when you're thinking of the majority of people, right? What do you think of when you hear something like that, right?
So what's interesting is I think we had an idea of what we wanted it to be, and what we wanted it to be was pieces show up and you react to those pieces and build a comp around what's been given, right? And it's like, oh, I'm getting a lot of predators in this game. I should go a predator comp, and I should roll with that and roll with the punches. I think as we've learned though, as our systems and everything, that the way you actually play it. And again, I don't know if this is correct, but this is the way you play right now, is you look at your items, you go, okay, these items work for this endgame comp that I can envision and want to chase after. So I should build those items, and I should find units that can use those items well in the meantime while I work towards that endgame comp. And that's how it's currently being played out. Is that correct? Is that what we want? I don't know that we actually originally wanted items to be quite as important as champions. Because champions are kind of like the bread and butter of League of Legends. Our IP is really good. And so if you told me, actually, if you get an Infinity Edge, that dictates your whole build, maybe not correct. But again, that's part of like game development on the fly as well, as like learning what it is and trying to adapt it. And I think one of the things we did with set 2 was we actually lowered a lot of the items' power, and they're still really good. So it's the kind of thing we might toy with, like maybe it needs to go down even lower, or maybe not. I don't know. But the more generic answer to your question, like you said, is like, as long as there are lots of ways to play, we're happy. But even we are still kind of learning like what actually is the real way to play this game. We're kind of along for the ride as well.
Cool.
Yeah, that is very interesting to hear, because that was one of the big unlocks for me when I first started playing, was like, because I was playing like, okay, yeah, I got I've got some rangers. I'm gonna go into rangers, and it's like, oh well, I have a bunch of rods, so it's actually not super good. And then like that unlock of like, oh well, I've got these bows, then I'm going to be looking towards rangers, and like having the items have more significance. And especially with like carousel priority, it's like the item is way more important in general.
Yeah, I mean, Blender comp relies not just on Blade of the Ruin King. That's only part 1. You need the Infinity Edges as well. And and so it's like all that prioritization is what dictates everything. So
Yeah, for
Fascinating stuff, Mort. Fascinating.
sure. Absolutely. Okay. We have to ask the question that we've all been waiting for, Mort. We need to get your opinion. Which little legend tastes the best?
The dark answer is it's got to be Silverwing.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's like KFC except more delicious. Like,
okay. So I think the bigger debate is this. Lev, you know exactly where I'm going with
Oh
this.
God,
You
why?
think that the happier little legends taste better than the sadder little legends? Because I think the happier ones must taste better. Their meat must be more tender, right? But then you think about like the philosophical, like, oh, do you want to kill something when they're happy? But I mean, if they taste better,
I mean, if you're literally just asking what tastes better, I assume something more happy is more active and more energetic, and therefore has more meat on its bones, and therefore tastes better. And this is a really dark conversation.
It always gets there.
We had such a good. We had 90% of just such a good, and we just had to throw it. That's the way.
I still place this above the corn comment.
Yeah. Oh, this is miles above that.
So I did ask someone this question yesterday, and it blew my mind because someone said it was the river Sprite because it tastes like water.
Yes.
And I was
you wash it down with a river Sprite.
Yeah, so you eat your Silverwing, you wash it down with a river Sprite, and you're good to go, right?
I mean, look, like water's fine, but like it's never gonna be like, man, what are you craving? I'm craving some water.
No, I mean there are some hydro homies out there, but I think you're right.
Yeah. Anyone who's like a ribeye steak or a water, like what?
Yeah, I know, right?
I
know,
enjoy
right?
water like other humans do.
Oh man, r/totally not robots is my new favorite subreddit.
Please
because
give
I
me
get
the
emails
water,
from
boo.
them. Yeah, I know. It's so funny. Okay, well, thanks for contributing to the tier list. I appreciate it. But one last thing before you go, and Bennett's this is a great thing. What do you like to do outside of gaming? You mentioned earlier that you had kids. I mean, do you like gaming with your kids? Is that the thing you like to do outside of League of Legends? Like, what are some of your hobbies outside of being the Mort God?
So this is again maybe one of the weird ways to end it, but I'm actually a pretty boring person. Like I'm very one-track mind. I mean, the room is like a gaming room. I do a lot of gaming. For example, I've been to Vegas like 3 times this year, but Vegas is actually fascinating to me from a game design perspective. It's like, oh, look at all this.
Strike me as a good craps player for that reason.
Possibly. I went to a football game with Riot Jag, and it's like I'm just interested in it as a game because it's like understanding the rules and things like that is fascinating. So yeah, so for me, like my life is family and games and work, and it's it. It's both healthy and unhealthy. Like I don't do much else, but at the same time, it's what allows me to kind of stay devoted to each of those. Like I've chosen 3 things and I do them really, really well. So yeah, as far as like family goes, my daughter just got a laptop for Christmas, which blows my mind that an 11-year-old in this day of age has a laptop. But apparently that's normal now. So just trying to like help her navigate the internet, which is challenging.
That's got to be terrifying.
Yeah, I was gonna say that is fear.
She's been playing Roblox lately, and Roblox is very community based. And 11-year-old girl on the internet in a community based game, you're like, okay, let's see this.
I could not imagine, man.
But like, I've also been a weird parent. Like, we let her play Diablo 3 when she was 6. And it's weird because it's an M-rated game, but to her it was like, kill the enemies really easily on normal, get new clothes, and play dress up. And you're like, cool, have fun.
Yeah.
I spent like an hour dressing up my Pokemon dude yesterday. I like saved up a bunch of money and I just went shopping, like in the game. And I hate shopping in real life. I don't know why, but I feel I get it. I get why you just want to like look, because you get power over how that character looks like. That's super cool for a kid.
Yeah.
That is definitely awesome, and that's really great to hear.
I'll end it on one fun story, kid related.
Yes, let's hear it.
One of the best things a game designer can do actually is to have kids, and the reason for this is, remember how I talked about how like understanding other players' perspectives is really important. Watching a 5-year-old interact with games will just open your eyes. And the moment for me most recently, when I had, not most recently, but a really big moment, was my daughter had 2 Wii U games to play: Yoshi's Woolly Yarn World
Mm-hmm.
and Splatoon. And when you look at those two, you're like, okay, which one would the kid enjoy more? It's got to be Yoshi, right?
Mhm.
Yoshi Woolly World. It's
a great game.
I mean, you'd think it'd be good. And the answer is no, not even close. It was Splatoon. And the reason, like, she beat Splatoon at age 6 and, like, only got to level 2 in Yoshi's Yarn World. And the reason for this was, like, the controls. Like, Yoshi is actually a pretty complicated game. You have to jump, move, use the tongue, throw the eggs, flap around. Really complicated control scheme. You know what Splatoon is? Move and shoot.
True.
That's it. Move and shoot. You know what she can do? Move and shoot.
That's true. Yeah, those are the types of things that I would just never think of. So that's really
and so, like,
eye-opening.
when you look at your system mechanics, you're like, whoa, if I really want everyone to play this, it's got to be real simple. And that's where, like, Splatoon gets a lot of points, because it's just it's move and shoot. That's it.
Who, in terms of your testing, who is better, the 5-year-old child or the 65-year-old Karen?
The 65-year-old Karen.
Okay, all right.
And
That's
the reason,
surprising, actually.
The reason for that is kids will adapt to anything. They will try to learn, and they will try. Like, we actually found, like, 11-year-old kids to be awful for testing, because it's just like they'll beat anything. You throw it at them, they will try to do anything. A 65-year-old Karen will be like, "This is dumb. I quit." And so it's
great.
like, you've got to figure out how to make them go, "Oh, actually, I enjoy this."
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, again, like, you give a kid a stick, and they'll be like, "This is awesome. I love it."
True.
That's awesome.
I've had some real fun times making up games with a stick with my friends. But that is our time. No, Boop. No.
Okay.
I'm beeping you out. I'm beeping you out of this episode.
That's the name of my college dorm. I couldn't do it. I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it.
Couldn't resist. Okay, not on that note. On a different note, Mort, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really do appreciate it. We appreciate everything that you do. The floor is yours. Any sellout, shout outs, anything you want to talk about or promote, or final words are yours.
Sure. I just, like, on behalf of everyone on the TFT team, and I mean everyone, again, like, everyone playing the game and being energetic and is what keeps us going. Keep giving us feedback. We love hearing from you guys. We just, we want to make the best game that you guys will enjoy. So thank you so much for everything you guys do and play the game. So, yeah.
Well, there you have it, folks. That was Mortdog, the one and only. Thank you again for coming on the show. I know this was a little bit more of an unconventional episode, and it was a longer one, guys, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. But that is going to be it for us, for Mortdog, for Boop. I am the Blevins, and we will catch you guys in 2020.
Crazy.
See ya.
Goodbye.